Hi, welcome to Elaine Enlightenings's video blog number 26. Today we're on lesson number 17 in A Course in Miracles. I'm really enjoying this process of doing this in my video blogs. Today the lesson is I see no neutral things. The reason we see no neutral things is because we have no neutral thoughts. This is totally the opposite of the way the world thinks and the way the world perceives, and is opposite of the way we have thought it was as well. It may seem kind of strange, and it may even, you might notice some fear or anxiety around this, or resistance to practicing the lesson today or any of the previous lessons that we've done in my video blogs, as we've done one a day. That's okay. If you notice that, you can just shorten the length of the time that you do the practice. And if you don't notice resistance or a lot of fear and you're doing the process, you can go the full minute. The idea isn't to overdo any of the lessons as you go through this process, because we don't want to try to force it. It's not about forcing anything. The minute we feel like we're being coerced or forced, then it doesn't have the benefit that it did before. And this process is gentle and slow and methodical, and it does work very well. So the idea is just to be committed and to recognize that it just takes a little willingness to actually have this process be effective for you. It doesn't matter if this idea makes sense, or if you believe it, or if you believe in God the way I use God. You can still benefit from these lessons, because there is a part of you that does understand this very much. And we're just recognizing the part that we take it and start taking responsibility for the part that's blocking the truth that's already there. So it is always the thought that comes first before we do anything, or before we have a belief about something. It starts in the thoughts. Okay? But that's not the way the world thinks, and you must learn that it is the way you think. If it were not so, perception would have no cause and would itself be the cause of reality. In view of its highly variable nature, this is hardly likely. So if you look around and see the things that change constantly, then you know that that is not based in truth. Truth has no change, totally changeless in nature. So as we shift our perception today in this particular lesson, we are noticing that we see no neutral things because we have no neutral thoughts. Okay? So you're supposed to glance around the room and notice the things that you see, and just say this phrase while you insert. I do not see a neutral, for instance, wall. I see a wall over there. You may be inside and see a wall while you're doing this video, because my thoughts about walls are not neutral. This may seem kind of confusing, and that's okay. It can feel that way because the ego wants us to get into confusion. If we can get into confusion, then we can feel like it's not true, and then we want to avoid that because we don't want to change the way we look at things. And that's okay. Just notice it, but don't judge it, and just be with it is the best way to do it, as opposed to start judging it as bad or wrong, or yourself as bad or wrong for doing it, or whatever might come to your mind. I thought I would share a little bit of detail with these particular thoughts today that are coming to me, so that we could maybe get a better understanding of how this is working. And then you can take this lesson and do it further throughout your day by applying the lesson 17 phrase that I'm going to be using here throughout your day. It suggests to use it 3 or 4 times today for a minute or less. And because I've done this before, I'm finding it very beneficial to apply it even more than that. But that won't happen if you're feeling resistance, because you're not going to think about it. And that's okay. Just notice that when you are open to it, you will remember to do it more. So if this is your first time through Course in Miracles, it's okay. You can just be with that it's a little bit less of a process, less time spent on it right now, and that's okay too. Just believe that it's perfect for you, whatever it is, okay? So I was, I'm going to use like my foot as an example. Okay, so I'll apply it to this lesson. I do not see a neutral foot because my thoughts about feet are not neutral. And I will just say that for myself, I used to see my feet in a very negative light. I used to look at them and be like, oh. I didn't really mind that they were long and skinny so much, but I didn't like that I had long toenails. I still have long toes. I said toenails. I don't have long toenails. I have really long toes in proportion to, even though I have very long feet, I have very long toes. And I used to think that that wasn't something that was attractive, so I never wore sandals. And really it hasn't been till the last 10 years that I started wearing sandals and showing my toes, and it was because a manicurist convinced me that she could make my feet look better by giving me a pedicure. And I just opted to do it that day, and I was surprised. Now, I did learn a lot about the care of my feet. I learned that, if I take really good care and keep the calluses off and that type of thing on a daily basis, then my feet do look better anyway. Although that wasn't the reason. It wasn't because they were dry and callousy. It was because of my long toes. And hair grows on my big toes. And it's not a bunch of hairs. It's not like bushy, but it's like 4 or 5 hairs. It was embarrassing to me. So now when I get waxed and my legs waxed, I just have that waxed off. And I do have pretty flowers painted on my big toes right now. But I also had a lot of problems with ingrown toenails. And when I got ingrown toenail surgery done, that took care of that, and then my toes didn't look puffy and sore and pink and that kind of thing around my toes, which also was not attractive. And so I do keep my toes painted and that type of thing, but they wouldn't have to be. It's just that I've found some things that I think helps so that I'm not embarrassed about my feet anymore. And so obviously I don't have neutral feelings about feet. And where did I get these ideas that my feet were ugly or that my toes were too long? Well, I don't really remember, but sometimes we can recall people's making comments and then we think that makes it bad. My feet look just like my dad's, and maybe that was why, because he was the guy and I didn't want to have my feet showing if they looked masculine, if I thought that was it. I'm not really sure. I have his long toes. But whatever it was, I had a negative idea. Now I don't have a negative idea about it. See how that changed? My perception changed, and I also changed my actions and that kind of a thing. But see, there's nothing neutral about it, but I probably compared them to other people. And that is where I got the idea. I've looked at other people's feet, especially women, and be like, oh, I wish my feet looked like that, or my nails look like that. I have a couple of toes that are more like hooves than actual toenails, so that is embarrassing to me too. But, by keeping them cared for and painted, they look fine. Nobody knows unless they're actually working on my feet about that. And, or if I tell you, like I just did. But it's not a big deal to me anymore. The point is that I'm just telling you how it's definitely not something neutral, and I'm focusing on my body today just to demonstrate some ideas about how this works, because also this is a pretty advanced idea and understanding, but we've actually created the bodies that we have. So oftentimes we want to blame our parents or blame our ancestors or our culture or our relatives or whatever for what we look like. And we want to blame them and actually not take responsibility for what we look like. Like I said, that's pretty advanced thinking. I'm not going to get way into that right now. But when we start realizing that we don't have neutral thoughts about things, and recognizing that we are creating the reality, this foot that I'm looking at and judging is in this reality, and I've created that reality. So that's really what it comes down to. And we've created these things because this is another advanced thought that I wanted to share. We created the things the way we did for a reason. And if we think that God created these bodies the way they are and the way the shape they are and that kind of a thing, then we're really blaming God. He created us as spirit, and He created us like Him and in His image. So the image on the outside is not what makes us like Him, and it's not what makes us like each other, and it's not what makes us who we are. But the thing is that we get all wrapped up in that identity, and then we try to find somebody to blame. And the thing is as we go through this process, and as you get through the year and advanced, what you can look forward to is realizing that I've created this for a reason, and right now I look at it through the ego, and that ego's version of everything, of my feet and everything else, is creating this misperception of how it can be understood in this world. So as we grow, we will have an understanding that takes on a viewpoint of God, and seeing these forms in a totally beautiful way, in a way that is life-serving and shows the connection between us and others. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to mention is, I'm just going to say about my fingers, because I've had a lot of judgments about my fingernails. So I could say, I do not see a neutral finger because I have no neutral thoughts about fingers. And I always thought my fingernails, my nail beds were awfully small for as long as my fingers are and as big as my hands are. And I didn't feel like it was very balanced and proportioned. And where did I get that idea? Well, I looked at people who have different shapes and thought, I decided what looked good, and I decided what I have doesn't look good. So here's another negative connotation where somebody else could look at their hands and that's one of the things they think is great. But this lesson applies, I want to show you how this lesson applies to what you think is great, what you think is bad, everything, okay? Because even our viewpoint, our perspective and opinion of it being good is still something that we want to be transformed. So then I want to mention about my legs, okay? So, well, I'm going to go back to something else first. I'm going to talk about my thyroid. My thyroid is something that's been on my mind because I have my blood tested to check out my thyroid. When I think of the thyroid, I think of a low thyroid, which is hypothyroidism. My mother had her thyroid operated on. She had a goiter removed from it. There's, a pattern of hypothyroidism in my family. It goes down even to one of my daughters in particular. And so I have all these ideas about a thyroid. I don't really know exactly what a thyroid looks like, because I'm not a doctor. I've never operated on one. I've looked at pictures, but I don't really retain that memory. But I have an idea of where it's at, what it looks like somewhat. But see, even that applies to this lesson. So it doesn't have to be a real solid thing that you even remember what it looks like or know for sure to apply. So I'm going to say I do not see a neutral thyroid because my thoughts about thyroid are not neutral. My thoughts about thyroids are not neutral. And so somebody else, another family, might have absolutely no thyroid issues in their family, whether it's high or low, and they don't really think about a thyroid. Or if it runs in women, which I think I've heard that, but don't repeat me. Don't repeat that on my account. But if that's the case, then men would have a different perspective of thyroid as well, or different maybe for men versus women based on that. And so then as far as like a positive thing about my body would be my legs. I feel like my legs are pretty great. I mean, they're long and they're fairly even. They say that they look for models that have the knee is halfway between the hip and the ankle, so that's more of a pleasing to look at leg. And where did I get the idea that my legs were great anyway, or that long legs are great? Well, I remember my grandma thought it was great that I was tall. My dad thought it was great that I was tall. I got my height from him, so he would like that. My mother thought it was great that I was tall. And but I remember going to camp when I was in junior high, and I was awarded the best legs in the camp. And so, that kind of substantiated this belief that my legs were great. So I will apply that to this lesson anyway, even though it may not, maybe my ego will want to resist sharing that and talking about it for fear that it might sound kind of prideful. And also might want to resist sharing this because I feel like if it's something that doesn't negative, there's no reason to really worry about whether it's neutral or not. But it still applies. I do not see neutral legs or a neutral leg because my thoughts about legs are not neutral. And that's true. I've just shared with you my perspective on legs. And I've seen pretty legs on short women, so don't get me wrong. I don't just think all pretty legs are long. But see, that's the whole point here. It's a changing kind of belief. And that's what we're applying to this lesson. So I thought I would share that with you so you would know that whether it's an inanimate or an animate object, or whether it is something pleasant or unpleasant to you, it all applies to this lesson, okay? So I'm going to leave it at that and allow you to practice this throughout your day. And thank you for joining me today, Elaine Enlightening at taplightUnlimited.com. Bye-bye.